everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Women of Troy Part 2, except first, tea. I have juniper and wild mint, which is actually really tasty.
Ooh, that sounds really good. I just have normal black tea, but it's Twinings, and I'm in Britain, so
Oh, I love Twinings tea.
see, so I'm like,
It's
obviously
wonderful.
good. So, can't argue with Twinings.
When I was, I worked as a camp counselor in upstate New York for a couple of summers, and my mum, like halfway through the summer, would always send me a care package with usually Marmite and always some kind of Twinings tea, and it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
I love the Twinings. I unfortunately have not become so British that I can say I like Marmite.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of British people who don't like Marmite either, so we can forgive you that one. We can their slogan is "You either love it or hate it." It's one of those things.
That's good. Well, you know what? I'm coming to terms with the mortality of my situation, which is I am due to fly back to it is now Thursday, so I'm due to fly back to Greece early on Monday morning. So my time in the UK is coming to a close in like 4 short days, and I'm so sad and depressed about it because I finally got to the point where my British friends did not have to correct me for saying most words because I said them in the British way without batting an eyelid or feeling weird or self-conscious. Like, we were in the car the other day, and I literally just, like, nonchalantly, without even thinking about how it's strange for an American, I just, like, pointed out and said, "Hey, you're low in petrol. Would you like to stop for more?" And she was like, "Bless my heart. Bless my heart." Yes.
I forget sometimes which words are British English versus American English, but a lot of the time, same words have different pronunciations, like schedule and schedule. I have no idea which I am supposed to be saying. Genuinely no idea which is American English and which is British English. And I will reliably get it wrong every single time I talk to my mother. And she's like, "No, Megan, we don't know. That's the wrong. And I'm like, "God damn it." And I thought long and hard, and you would be surprised how often this word comes up in conversations with my mum. I don't know why it does, but it does semi-regularly, and I always get it wrong, and I feel
But I
much
feel
shame.
like if anyone would be able to be forgiven for mistakes like this, it's you, because you've lived in the States for a very long time, enough to be Americanized, enough to because it's like when you come over here, unless you're planning on going right back to the UK and don't want to bother learning Americanisms, you're gonna learn them, and then you have an American husband and American children. So like, I feel like no, it makes sense that you are like a British person who uses American English, unless you try to code switch when you talk to people back home, which then goes disastrously because then it confuses your poor brain.
I can do it when I'm in the UK. It's when I'm in the US, and it's not all words, but usually when I'm in the US trying to talk British English, it just is very difficult.
It's okay. I'm gonna have the same issues because honestly, I've picked up so much British English and British expressions. I'm gonna wanna say them, and when I get home, people are gonna be like, "Stop, you're being pretentious, you're not even British."
Just call me and say, "Megan, I have to talk to you about petrol." It's really important.
About petrol and aluminium.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
and coriander.
Yep. Oh, coriander. This is just
See,
such a good word.
this is why I need more British friends. Right, this is why I need British friends, so I can call and just be like, "I miss my life in the UK. I need to talk about it with someone who understands, because most Americans don't understand."
Here are all of the words I need to say to you right now.
Exactly, and I need to talk about petrol at petrol stations.
Mhm. Petrol stations. Yep. Roundabouts.
So
Oh,
that's what I'm gonna do when I need my fix, my kick of Britishisms. I will call you and be like, "Hey, do you miss talking in like normal like Britishisms? Because we can let's dance."
absolutely. That sounds wonderful.
Yes. Okay, so do you have any snacks today?
I have Pocky, actually. It was in my Secret Santa box, and it's wonderful. And I'm eating it before my kids realize I have any. Because as soon as they realize, I will not have Pocky anymore.
Oh.
My
Well, it's
four-year-old is very good at finding the hiding places that I have for candy. So he ate most of the chocolate my husband got me for Christmas.
no. Wait, can
No,
you can you hide any of it on your own personage, or is that like not good because the children crawl all over you?
they do that. They do that, unfortunately. So they don't know about the Pocky. I'm eating it quietly, sneakily before they realize. He's downstairs watching cartoons, so he's not going to come looking for me. So yes,
Good.
yes.
Actively engaged.
Are you snacking
Yes.
today?
Not currently, although I can just admit the most American thing I've done the entire time I've been living in Britain. I caved the other day and I ordered 1 box of American Kraft mac and cheese because I wanted it so bad. And so I just made that for lunch and I just finished inhaling the entire bowl.
There are some food things that are just so like you can't replicate them. And I don't get the Kraft mac and cheese thing because I didn't grow up on it. But there are some things like Tesco's frozen sausage rolls. They're these little party snacks that my mum always used to get for Christmas and New Year's and birthdays. And I'm one of 4, sometimes 6, depending on how many kids were in the house. And she'd just whack them in the oven, take them out, and we would literally demolish the entire tray. And I miss those like they're my firstborn child sometimes. And like, I need my sausage rolls, and I can make sausage rolls. I've made them before, they're delicious, but they just don't taste the same. And
Can
I
you
miss
order them?
them.
Can you
No,
order them?
no, unfortunately.
Well, if I'd have known, I would run out and get them and send them to you. Oh man.
But yeah, I absolutely get the Kraft mac and cheese thing
Yeah,
because
it's
there are
just,
some
it's
foods I just crave.
yeah, because people are like, but it's not even good. It's not even real cheese. You're living in Europe that has real, like, good cheese. Why are you
But
eating?
it
And I'm like,
doesn't
look,
taste like your childhood.
exactly. And I'm like, I don't eat this stuff because it's
Yeah.
delicious. I eat it because I want comfort food. And then
Mhm.
it takes me back to sitting at the table when I'm like 5 with my mommy making me mac and cheese. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I eat it. But yeah, so I just had a nice big thing of it and it was delicious.
Good.
And let me register while I'm at it. I'm really mad that the UK does not have goldfish because it is like my favorite snack in the world.
Goldfish are
And so
fantastic.
actually I have a box of goldfish that I've been
Good.
saving and saving for months. And I've been waiting to probably eat it right before I leave the UK, just, triumphantly eating goldfish. But
Perfect.
come on, UK, get goldfish. I want them.
Agreed. They are excellent snacking foods. But we should talk Women of Troy, part
Do you want to
2.
give a summary of part 2 since you're so good at doing our summaries?
Yes. So we leave off when Pyrrhus has found someone trying to bury Priam, and he's dug him up and said, anyone who is caught trying to bury this, what is now a kind of rotted off corpse, will be put to death. And you just know that Amina's going to go back out and try and bury him, and somehow Briseis is going to get caught up in it. And that's what happens. Ta-da! So Amina goes, tries to bury him, and Briseis goes and is like, no, you can't do that, and then ends up helping her bury him. And they get caught, and it's a whole thing, and Pyrrhus ends up killing Amina in a really weird, yeah, we'll get to that, but that whole scene was very odd because we've got a couple more chapters from Pyrrhus' point of view. Very strange. And we have the games that they've kind of been talking about in the background to keep the men occupied and not start killing each other because they're so bored and trapped on a beach. And we find out that one of the slave girls is pregnant with her Trojan, now dead, boyfriend, boyfriend's baby, and that's the whole thing. So she has a baby, and it's a boy, which is also a whole thing because all the Trojan baby boys were killed and all the pregnant women were killed just in case they had a boy. So that's a little bit of intrigue. And we get Cassandra marrying Agamemnon, and Cassandra and Calchas kind of plotting together to try and get Pyrrhus to have to sacrifice his beloved horse, which was it didn't end up happening. And I think Pyrrhus got out of it in a very clever way. But that was interesting. And we have Priam's funeral because they decide that that's why they're stuck on the beach, because of the funeral rites haven't taken place and because of offending Zeus and the guest friendship hospitality thing. So all of that happens. And eventually they get to leave. And yeah, you kind of, Briseis narrates the last chapter kind of saying goodbye to everyone and all the women being put on their different ships and sailing off. And I have to say, I enjoyed this half. I found it less compelling than the first half. And I've been trying to put my finger on why, and I'm not entirely sure. It didn't feel as emotionally engaging maybe as the first half did. I know in the first half I felt like a lot of like sadness for Briseis and like really felt quite connected to a lot of the characters. For some reason in the second half that didn't seem to carry through. I don't know why. And it just wasn't, it didn't feel like a strong, the whole of the novel didn't feel as strong, I think, as Silence of the Girls. And I'm going to be interested because there is a third book coming, I think, in 2024, which is the journey back to Greece. So I will be interested to see how it kind of carries on, because again, both Silence of the Girls and The Women of Troy are characterized by the women's lack of agency and just the inability to leave. Everyone's inability to leave, men and women, they're stuck on the beach in both books. And in the third book, they're going to be stuck on boats. So it will be interesting to see how that kind of works itself out. I was sad that we didn't get more Helen. I was not surprised, but I was sad that we didn't get more Helen. It was a delight to see Hecuba back. She continued to be brilliant and wonderful and amazing, and commanding Odysseus to come to her tent, even though she's a slave and he's a king. And he came, because of course he did. Yeah. I said an awful lot in this brief synopsis, but that's kind of what happened. Lexi, what are your thoughts?
Wow. And now I'm starting with It's okay. You know what? I can edit that out or whatever. Anyway, that's the beauty of podcasting. But I will say I agree that the second half I did not find as compelling, but I think because I was trying to diagnose why I felt like it. And so in trying to take a stab at why I think it's because the first half was so well done in terms of you have to set up the dynamics and the relationships, and you have to get into kind of the nitty gritty, and you have to get into the conflict. And so what you get is, a first look at, okay, what does the relationship look like now that the war is over? What's happening now that they're stuck in this situation and they can't leave and they can't go home, even though they really want to. So I think it was compelling because it built up all these relationships and you were talking to these people often for the first time. But what you're getting in the second half, though, is you already know Amina, you know all the characters, you know the dynamic, and the book has to find a way to shove the plot forward and get to the end of it to the point where they leave. So one, I felt like, okay, well, I know what's coming, so she's going to have to tie this off and figure it out. Like, there's only so far you can extend the mystery. So I liked the first half because it was building up the mystery. But once you kind of pass that climax, you're kind of like, okay, well, now, like, okay, they found who's trying to bury Priam, and now we just have to punish them, and we have to now get from the wrongful punishment and all this stuff. You have to get to where suddenly, how does Priam actually get buried? So I felt like it was just, she spent a lot of time building up the first half and really investing in the characters, but I feel like I get it because on the one hand, you don't have forever unless you want a massively long novel, but at the same time, she almost didn't leave herself enough room, in my opinion, because then she just crammed it together. So then it felt like, because the thing is, I don't know about you if you felt this, I still had no freaking concept of time. I was like, when is this happening? Is this all one day, then the next day? So they found Amina and then they locked them in the tent at night and then she went to prison and then they killed her the next day or they killed her 10 days from that. Like, I was like, what? So the herky jerky compressing of the second half narratively got lost in the I don't know what when this is happening, and so it just felt quite clunky, which is why I think it just didn't feel smooth
Yeah,
in the way the first half did.
yeah, and I'm still unclear as to how long they were actually on the beach in this particular narrative. The days seem to, I mean, I think deliberately bleed into like one long thing, which makes sense. They've been there forever. It probably doesn't feel like days are distinct anymore, but it didn't work for me terribly well as a narrative device. And I felt like the discovery of who was burying Priam and then Amina's very quick and unplanned, like completely almost accidental death. I mean, it wasn't an accident because Pyrrhus throttled her, but not because of what she did to Priam, because she had seen how badly he bungled Priam's execution, for want of a better word, because she was there. And he was like, oh, no one must know. And then he killed her, so no one knows. But then you get this like little bit from Pyrrhus saying, there were like 30 or 40 women there. I can't kill them all. I just have to deal with it. So I found his inner turmoil very interesting, but it felt like that was the climax of the book, but it came at the halfway point. And then the rest of it, it didn't feel like it was going anywhere. There were lots of little events that happened, but I didn't feel like there was much of a driving anything behind it. And I wanted things developed more, I think, that weren't. So I wanted Briseis' relationship with her husband explored more fully, because that was really interesting to me. We know that he was in love with her when she was Achilles' slave. We know that Achilles married her off to him, knowing that he would die and she needed someone to take care of him. And it looks like they've essentially ignored each other for however long they've been married. And I wanted that explored more. That could have been really interesting. And at some point in the second half of the book, Briseis says that he thinks she's in love with Achilles. He thinks that she loved him and still loves him. That would have been a really interesting thing for them to explore as a pair of characters who are tied together for better or worse. So I was disappointed that wasn't really gone into a little bit more. And I mean, the book is called The Women of Troy, so it's unsurprising that the male characters don't figure terribly largely. But the main relationship between the women in the first half of the book was Briseis and Amina. And then you kill Amina off. And then it's just kind of Briseis wandering around talking to whoever is there and whoever needs help. And even Ritza, who's the slave in the hospital tent, she doesn't play terribly largely, because she goes from being Briseis' essentially best friend in the first book to friend still in the first half of the book, but then you only see her a couple of times in the second half, and it just felt like we were losing the more interesting relationships that could have been explored and developed. And also, the other thing I wanted looked at more, and again, it's the women of Troy, not the men of Greece, but the conflict between the Myrmidons and the men that Pyrrhus brought with him from Skyros, because that's touched on in several places. There's clearly something going on there. That would have been really, really interesting to look at further and to develop a bit more. And I don't know, maybe she'll get to it in the third book, but yeah, it felt like the main relationship was ended halfway through, and then we didn't really get anything to replace it.
I mean, as I said, I understand where she couldn't. Well, she could have, but she didn't want to. Nor would I think it would have been appropriate for her to have like a massive novel, because I mean, you don't want to read that unless you like really, really are invested. So I understand her not wanting to have something end up twice the length of the current novel, because that would just be a lot. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, as I said, yeah, it's just like I like the first half because it builds the mystery and it builds it world builds, it character builds, and it builds the plot. The second half feels very sort of yeah, it just feels quick. It feels quick and compressed. I was thinking about saying for a minute that it felt a bit undeserved, like like that we didn't like we deserve better. But I don't want to say that because actually there's probably a lot that went into the decision that obviously we're not privy to. So I won't say it's an undeserved ending, but yeah, it just I think I would have even appreciated even like with Briseis's narration, if she wanted to imply that this lack of timeline was like the hell of you don't know because time doesn't matter anymore because you're miserable and you're a slave and so whatever. I would have appreciated that in the context of she could have just like started the narration or even ended or said something like, and we were stuck on this beach for 10 days, but these 10 days were so long and miserable that it felt like one big long never-ending day. Like she could have said something, to just imply it, give us a timeline one, and then two, yes, if maybe it's a little too on the nose to be like, yes, and it felt like one long unceasing day. Like, okay, maybe that's a little dramatic. I get it. But I would have appreciated some nod because I'm like, look, if you know the original source material, they don't really talk about, oh, yes, and they defeated the Trojans and then they were stuck on the beach for a year and then they left for home. No, what we normally hear when you see adaptations of or read the Iliad and stuff. You just hear like, okay, they won, and then they took the time to get the slaves and the booty, and then boom, they left. So yes, it's like it's a little ambiguous, but that doesn't imply like the amount of stuff that she has happening in her novel. It makes it seem like it's not just a couple days, but also, I'm like, is that enough time to feel like a year or
Yeah.
something? Uh, 6 months? I mean, I was trying to, like, measure the time based on Priam's corpse. So here I was trying to be Little Miss Scientist, Googling, and anyone looking at my Google history would be like, "Is she insane?" Because I was, like, Googling, "How long does it take for a corpse to, like, disintegrate? How long before it starts smelling, but not is, completely worn away?" I was trying to literally figure out how long based on the decomposition of Priam's body. But then I was like, well, there's so many factors that go into a body's decomposition that I was like, I don't think I can guess because weather affects it. If it's cold, then it'll be preserved longer. If it's warm, it'll go faster. I was like, at the end, I kind of gave up because I was like, I'm not a scientist. I don't like science. So I was not super invested in actually breaking it down to the actual science. But yeah, no, I was Googling around being like, okay, so approximately how long do they have? Because if the body decomposed in like 10 days, then this probably took place all in 10 days. I don't know. It was strange.
I
Strange.
think I think going off something you said a minute ago, I think one of the things that the book suffers from is too many different plot points
Mm.
with not enough time to fully develop any of them.
Mhm.
Because I enjoyed Cassandra's sections. I found her really interesting. I enjoyed the interplay between her and Calchas and them trying to work out, why are we stuck here? Can we give the Greeks a reason so that they have someone to blame so that maybe we can move forward? I enjoyed Hecuba's sections. They were really interesting. I enjoyed looking at the women in the slave hut and Briseis' relationship with them. But because it's quite a short book, and I don't have it, it's in my bedroom. It's not a long book. I read the second half in an hour and a half. It's not a huge thing. But because it's so short, I feel like she tried to put too much in. And I think it probably would have, and again, I admire what was going on with it. It feels an awful lot like Thousand Ships because you have these different stories all kind of interwoven together. I think where Thousand Ships succeeded and this one maybe could have done better on is taking those stories a little further. And the reason Thousand Ships could do it was because it was from all the different viewpoints and the different perspectives. I think this one
And
is
clearly on different timelines too.
exactly. This one is all from Briseis or Pyrrhus, but mainly Briseis. So the reader isn't privy to any of the internal workings of the other women. In Thousand Ships, you know what's going on in all their heads, so it moves the story faster and more fully than you can do if you're having to have things revealed to you via narration. And I think that's something that I struggled with, because it's interesting, it's good stuff. It just, we didn't have enough of any specific thing for me to feel terribly emotionally invested in what was going on. And I think maybe if we'd removed one of the plot points, either the women in the slave tent or Hecuba or Cassandra, if we'd removed one of those, it would have given more space to, or even two of them, just choose one, it would have given more space to develop what was going on. Like if we took out the women in the slave tent and had Cassandra and Hecuba kind of tied in together, because there's a whole family dynamic there, and then you've got that related to Priam's burial, and had everything kind of moving forward to, how do we get Priam buried? How do we get off this beach? And have Briseis involved in those things, instead of kind of flitting between all the different stories and all the different people, I think it maybe would have been a more satisfying read.
I think so. I agree, but also I think one of the reasons, at least for me, Ships did so well though is because it is told in a very non-linear timeline. Because you could literally go from chapter 2 with what's her name? Oh my god, wait, why am I blanking on her name?
Aeneas' wife.
Yes, Aeneas. Wait, what the fuck's her name? Sorry.
No, I can't remember either.
My brain just hurts today. Ah, okay. Well, I'll remember it in a minute because it always comes back to me. Anyway, so you could have her, and then what you could also then have though was the very next one would be Oinoni, and then you'd be like, oh, well, this is clearly not in the same time as anybody else. So you're like, okay, well, then this is completely different. Or you go from the goddesses at the beginning of the war having their little contest, and then you have Penthesilea being like, okay, well, this is the day I go kill Achilles, and you're like, okay, well, I know exactly what's happening, because she sets the own, like, her own mini timeline, and she basically tells you exactly when in the war, when in the sequence it's happening. And so I don't mind that she jumps around, because it doesn't have to be a linear story. So I loved that. And her name is Creusa. Thank
Nice.
you,
Well done.
Creusa. Anyway, so I liked that, and it's what made it unique. And so I think, yeah, this could have benefited from a non-linear time. Now, if you wanted to say, okay, it's going to be told from the perspective of Briseis, and she's mostly going to talk about her time between the end of the war and when they could leave, I'd be like, okay, fine. If you want to bring in some of the other perspectives, just say, it could have been as simple as, okay, I'll take Cassandra. Oh, yes. Briseis has been busy doing this. Well, I've been doing this while she's been doing that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. But I don't like how she just walks around saying, I see her now. And I'm like, well, what is she doing in the meantime?
And I think because we have that with Pyrrhus, right? I don't think we had that in Silence of the Girls. Wasn't it all from Briseis' point of view? Like, did we
Yes, it
have?
was.
Yeah. So because she's already introduced this different viewpoint thing with Pyrrhus.
Or no, wait, did we have a bit of Patroclus, actually?
Oh, maybe. I don't remember.
Because I know, so, like, because I remember, because I think when we originally read them, right, we did Song of Achilles, which is all Patroclus, but then I think I was pleased because then we switched to
Right,
Silence
yeah.
of the Girls, and then we were like, oh wait, we still get him, but from a different
Mm-hmm.
perspective, because this Briseis is different than the other Briseis.
No, I think
So
you're
we
right.
might have done a bit of him.
But either way, different viewpoints is not out of ordinary for this book. It could have been done really easily, and I think you're right. I think it would have helped
Just have a mini timeline within each person.
And again, I do understand the need to convey the monotony of being stuck on a beach. I absolutely understand that. The problem is from a reader's point of view, it's difficult to read. And you're left, like we've said, with these disparate events that are strung together. They're related, but there's not a lot of, I don't know, impetus, driving force behind what's going on.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, I was a little disappointed with the second half, but one thing I did wanna get into though was when Pyrrhus finally is accused of, violating the guest friendship, so you have to bury him and all that. The whole, you have to sacrifice your horse, and then he gets out of it by cutting off his hair. What like, what was going through your mind then? Because I was just like, I mean, yay for the horse because I'm such a horse person, so I'm like, "Yay, horse didn't die," but I was also like, "Really? After all you've done and you've made it's now clear that you're the one responsible for keeping everyone here for this undetermined amount of time, but everyone's pissed about it, and all you gotta do is cut off your hair and you're good? Really?"
I was waiting for it to fail. I was waiting for him to do that and for them to still be stuck on the beach. I was really surprised that he did that, and then suddenly the wind has changed and they can leave. And it just felt, I mean, I didn't want the horse to die either, right? That seemed really, really petty on the part of Cassandra and Colchis to be like, you got to sacrifice your horse, dude. Sorry, it's the only way forward. But there has to be something. And the cutting of the hair, I mean, Briseis says, oh, it might not seem much to a Trojan, but to the Greek warriors watching who were so proud of their long flowing locks, this was a huge thing. And it's never been mentioned before. We obviously know Pyrrhus has red hair because it's spoken about as a defining feature when he's on the chariot in the chariot race. He takes off his helmet and then there's this mane of red hair and everyone cheers because they know who it is. But nowhere in neither of the books has anyone made a big thing about Greek warriors having long hair, about it being a sign of manhood or virility or pride or nobility or any of this. And suddenly, cutting his hair is apparently enough to appease the gods for murdering a man who was in a guest friendship with his father. It just seemed so out of left field. It was quite irritating. And then it works. And yeah, I was fully expecting, reading that sequence, I was expecting for him to do it, for it to fail, and then for there to be some kind of conflict surrounding that had to be resolved before they could leave. Maybe he doesn't have to kill the horse. Maybe he has to do something else, but some kind of sacrifice, personal sacrifice, to atone for what he's done, like as opposed to cutting his hair. It was odd.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Okay, my brain works weird, and anyone who knows me or who's probably heard me on one of the podcasts probably knows that my brain is weird. So I did know. I mean, okay, for someone who has no background in Greek mythology who reads this, cutting your hair because it's such a big deal and it's a sign of warrior's pride. Yeah, that is really out of left field. Now, as a classicist, luckily I did have the background to know that yes, like your long hair, because they were the long-haired Achaeans, like they're very, very proud of their long hair, and it is a sign of great pride. And if you have short hair, you're like the weirdo who basically has no accomplishments. So I did know that, but one, I did not expect that to be nearly enough. But also, it was funny because the first thing that popped into my head when I did hear about the whole, well, what if I just cut my hair, my source of pride? It made me think of Game of Thrones and the Dothraki, because you know how they have the long hair, so you like, because they have this cool tradition. And I didn't pick it up from the show. It was when I was going in through like the more in-depth nerd files of, okay, let's look more into Westerosi and Game of Thrones universe stuff. But every time they conquer someone or win a battle, they would add a braid. And so that's why when you see Khaleesi through all 8 seasons, why her hair gets more braids and more intensive designs, it's because she was conquering all those people, so she could add all those cool braided patterns. And I was like, oh, I finally understand. This is cool. So my brain thought of the Dothraki, and I was like, Yeah, actually. Well, if we were in Game of Thrones world, it would be a big deal if you cut your hair. I mean, that would be like, "Oh my god, you lost all your pride. You have no accomplishments. Ha ha ha, we're gonna laugh at you." So, on the one hand, to me as a classist, it made more sense that it was the hair rather than something else. I was expecting, yes, that the hair alone would fail, but I figured, like, the hair would be enough of a big deal that they could be like, "'Kay, your hair and sacrifice a slave," or something of that nature. Um I don't think I would have expected something much bigger than that, because
Or like bury Priam with Achilles' armor.
but see,
Like
no, there's no
this is something
precedent
that's
for that.
yeah, but the thing is, in the book, there's no precedent for the hair thing either.
I know, and I'm only drawing that because of my
I
knowledge
know
of Greek culture.
I'm glad to hear that there is an actual reason it was in there. It wasn't just like plucked out of the ether.
No,
But
but I get what you mean, like, if you don't know, if you're not a classicist, you would never pick up on that. You'd just be like, "Okay, so randomly cutting his hair." No, so I agree, there should have been something more. Um, I j I don't know, 'cause even then, I'm like, "Okay, maybe for entertainment purposes, yeah, okay, Barry Prime and Achilles," but I'm also just like, "Yeah, but he." That to me, that's almost too far because it's like, well, Priam didn't defeat Achilles, so you wouldn't really give that honor. Like, if anything, Hector should have been buried in it because he at least dueled the man. He didn't win, but he dueled him. Uh, I never want to give Paris any credit for anything, so I'm like, no, 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 I don't want to give him the armor. But just like if you're gonna have someone dead who had some connection, like, so to me, I'm like, there wasn't something like that. Or
what we need is something that is deeply personal to Pyrrhus. Yeah, like give him Priam's ring or something. Something that was deeply personal to Pyrrhus that would actually hurt him to give up, which is why Cassandra and Calchas chose the horse. But that was like not because I feel like sacrificing a slave doesn't really do much for Pyrrhus. Like he doesn't care. He's got 8 bazillion slaves. And he can't kill like his favorite slave is Andromache. They can't kill Andromache because that just goes with the guest friendship thing again, and it's even more of a violation, like when they kill Polyxena.
But why does he have to give up what if they saddled him with responsibility? Like, "Okay,
Ooh.
you need to raise Andromache's child," or something like, "She was your wife, the wife of your great enemy, Hector," whatever. I don't know. Just, like,
Like make him
yes.
marry Andromache instead of Menelaus and Helen's daughter and say, look, you killed her father, you killed her husband, you violated this guest friendship agreement. You are responsible for her well-being and maybe for Hecuba's well-being. Like you have to take her in and treat her like the honored mother-in-law that she is.
Yeah, because I think, like, yes, you can think about punishment as you have to take something away from someone, but I think actually that's as hard as that is, I think it'd be harder to be saddled with the responsibility that you don't want, because if you lose something, if it's taken away, then it's like you're really mad, you're really sad, but then it's gone, and then you're like, "Okay, whatever, it's pieced out here." But if he was saddled with the great responsibility of, like, marrying her or treating her nicely or something, that sticks around because you can't kill her, because then everyone will know you killed her just to get rid of the responsibility. It's like anything in life, responsibility follows you around whether you like it or not. So, for me, I'm like, actually, I would go the other way because I think punishment is worse when you're forced to do something you don't want instead of just losing something. Because I mean, they both suck, but is gone. So, and the thing is, back then, guest friendship was the most sacred and most important, like, thing in ancient Greece. Like that is the one, do not violate, never violate guest friendship. Oh my gosh, because Zeus of Xenia is going to come and, like, bring horrible things to you if you violate this. So, yeah, it would have warranted some sort of forced responsibility in my opinion. Definitely. And actually, taking care of Priam's widow would have been like the perfect revenge. Like, "Oh, you killed the man, you didn't bury him, you violated his guest friendship. So guess what, honey? You got to take his widow into your home. You have to free her, or like free her, don't make her a slave, or even if she is a slave, you have to treat her as an honored guest in your house." Right. See, some like
Yeah.
something to be like, now you must repay the guest friendship to his
That would
wife.
have felt fitting. That would
Yes.
have felt really fitting.
We could just rewrite the whole book for her.
We could. It'd be fun. I'm sure she'd be thrilled.
It would be really fun to talk to her about why she made the decision she did. Because this would be the one thing where I'd be like, please talk to us about this. Really, really. So yeah, that was interesting. But okay, did were you also a bit like taken aback by how they also minimized the pregnancies of both Briseis and Andromache in the second half, because they made such a big deal about it in the first half? And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's building, it's growing. Hopefully they'll both give birth to these children, and then we'll see this great dynamic about it. And then no, not
I was
really.
expecting Briseis to have her baby before the end of the book. And we get a baby, but it's the baby of I can't remember her name, but the baby of the slave girl. And it's a lovely story. She essentially falls in love with another slave, and they sneak off together and kind of court, and she gets pregnant. And then, little weird, because she's a larger lady and is always shrouded in black, no one realizes she's pregnant until she is actually, well, Briseis doesn't realize. The other slave women know. Briseis doesn't realize she's actually in labor until she throws up. And one of the other slaves is like, how do you not know what's going on here? And Briseis says, oh, yes, well, we should do something about this. And that was a very compelling section, because there's the fear of someone will hear a woman in labor and come and kill her, or come and kill the baby, and then the baby is born and it is a boy, which is big problem. So they swaddle him and they tell everyone, oh, the slave girl had a baby girl in the night. Lovely. And no one really cares, because the slaves have babies. It's one of the ways you make more slaves. And yeah, that was, I felt something there. That was a good section. And then she kind of pops up again, and all the slave girls are really happy because there's a baby, and it's a nice distraction. And then when Pyrrhus, and again, this was a bit that was confusing, because Pyrrhus walks into the slave arena, slave area, and sees the naked baby, and it's a naked baby, and it's a boy, and obviously it's a boy. And Briseis, her internal monologue says, okay, we have to get this baby and this mother away before this crazy man kills them. But then directly after that, you have a section narrated by Pyrrhus, who apparently hasn't even noticed that there is a male child in his slave camp. He never mentions it. And he's concerned with Amina, and that's the section where he kills her. But they still move forward with moving the mother and child to someone else's encampment, which again was interesting, but I was a little confused. I was expecting some kind of fallout, some kind of Pyrrhus asking after this random male baby, or at least thinking about it in the sections that he narrates. It felt a little strange.
Look, it's all well and good. I'm sure it added a dimension to the story. But to me, that whole thing was like a bunch of the excess fat that sort of bloated and took the story in ways where you could have taken the space and devoted it to something really central to your main characters or your plot.
Yeah.
I like, on the one hand, I sort of understand what she was going for when she wanted to have this whole thing, but she spent a lot of the first half of the entire book talking about Briseis' complicated relationship with this baby, and how the Myrmidons felt like they owned it because, oh, you're carrying the great son of Achilles, and how they were like, this is our baby and your baby, but our baby too. And you have this whole thing about how she's like, I don't know, because it's my shield, it's my protection, so I need to love it, but I also don't love it because this was produced by someone I didn't really like, and he killed my family. And she set up this beautiful thing.
And then it's completely ignored in the second half.
Right. So I was like, why? Because I'm like, you could have taken that slave baby. Fine, I'm sure to add something. I put it in the next book, honey. Put it in the next book. Because what I want is, I want to see more of, when your baby is born, how do the Myrmidons react? How do you react? How does Andromache react? Like, I don't understand what the hell is the point of, I mean, if it's sort of an issue, but you don't want to make it a defining issue of your novel, Then what she could have done is
Don't devote
instead
the
of
first half to it.
right, like, instead of spending so much time on having her be conflicted about her pregnancy and how she doesn't like it, then just have her be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm pregnant. Yeah, I'm I'm having a baby. Great. Woo!" Like, just don't go into such detail about the conflicted feelings if you're not gonna do anything with it. So, yeah, no, I got, pretty sad and mad, yeah.
I think you're right that I did enjoy reading that section, but overall it didn't add an awful lot to the book or to the story as a whole, especially because the slave who's pregnant doesn't feature very largely in the whole of the first half. She pops up occasionally, you know who she is, but she's no one that Briseis ever talks to. She's not really given any space to speak herself. So I think if I think you're right. I think if you want to have a birth sequence or something to do with someone having a baby, you have a pregnant main character. Maybe go with that instead of a random person having a random baby, which is very sweet. Yay babies. I'm obviously a fan of babies. I have had several. But it didn't do a lot for the story. And I
No.
feel I do wonder if once Amina was dead, Pat Barker felt like she needed to add some kind of conflict in there because Amina and Briseis had this like weird tense relationship and um which was interesting. So that's gone. We need something else to occupy people, but I'm not sure this was necessarily the way to go.
I mean, look, if you want some conflict over babies, you got Andromache who's there too, and you've got her she's pregnant. So, if she wanted to set up some drama, then she could have had at least Andromache's baby born and then have some sort of conflicted relationship over her baby and how she feels about it. You could make Andromache love the baby, and then you could have Briseis like, "How can you love your captor's baby?" Like something. I just don't see the utility of bringing in a random person who just was not important in the first half, and then you're like, "Oh, suddenly she's here." That's my problem. I don't like books that have a lot of excess fat. Like, trim the fat, honey. You know what? I will happily read things, but I I just don't bring in something for, like, no good reason. I don't understand. I don't understand that. Eh although, do you think maybe she's waiting because she wanted the babies to be born in the new book on the ship?
I'm wondering, yeah, I'm wondering if that's what is going on because you have Briseis. If she was in camp and giving birth, then Ritza would be there, who is like has been her like anchor point really for a book and a half. She's not going to be on the ship because she's Agamemnon's slave. She's going with Agamemnon. So you have Briseis kind of alone almost. She has Andromache, but they're not super duper close. She has Andromache and she has the rest of Pyrrhus' slave women, but there isn't really anyone in the same way that she can lean on and draw strength from. So it could be that that's going to be one of the central points in book 3.
Mm. I mean, I guess if she wants to wait and make the drama play out when they're, like, on the ships with Briseis having her child, fine, but also that would mean that she would have to know immediately that she wanted to go on, and she would probably have to figure that this book would not be ready for a couple more years, so she probably then would have to sit there and make the decision like, "Okay, I'll leave people on a cliffhanger because I made such a big deal." But to not even hint, like, at the end of the book that maybe something is coming, like, she didn't do anything with it. So I'm kind of like, if you're not gonna hint or sort of build a little, you can shove it to the back burner, but still kind of make it seem like, okay, it'll be a thing. Like, there was none of that. So either she just, like, didn't think about it, and then she was like, "Oh, whoops, I forgot. I guess I'll put it in the next one," as she's writing the next one. Or maybe she just had a different idea. I have no idea. I'm just like, it struck me as very strange, and I just was like, "Okay, I don't know." There were a lot of things that I kind of if you were to see me, I just sort of made a
Mhm.
face, and I was like, "Really? What?" So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, were you disappointed about anything else big, or did the rest of it, excluding all the things we've basically highlighted, was it kind of like, okay, I
I
was
was a
expecting that?
little surprised by how prominent Cassandra gets in the second half. I enjoyed
Mm.
it. I find her character very interesting. And um, looking ahead to book 3, it's apparently going to be focusing more on Cassandra and Agamemnon and what happens when they get back to their home, which will be interesting because I don't know if I assume Briseis will be narrating it, so how that happens will be very interesting. So it makes sense that she gets a bigger part as the book goes on because she's going to figure prominently in book 3. But I was surprised to see that much of her. I was happy to see that much of her because, like I said, she's an interesting character. It was a little surprising that she was so instrumental, or seems to have been so instrumental, in trying to bring about Pyrrhus' downfall. The decision or the accusation of Calchas to say that, oh well, the reason we're stuck on the beach is because Pyrrhus violated the guest friendship of his father and Priam, is very clearly, and it's explicitly said between some of the women, this is a scheme cooked up by Cassandra and Calchas with Briseis, because she is kind of like an instrumental witness. She says, oh well, Achilles used specific terminology when talking to Priam, and he said that he would, if when Troy falls, call me and I will defend you, which is guest friendship stuff, right? So without Briseis, they don't really have much evidence for that. But it's a scheme cooked up by Cassandra and Calchas, which was interesting and unexpected. And I think so. We see Calchas in the first half of the book also, and we get a couple of chapters narrated by him too. But the relationship that we see in the first half is Calchas and Hecuba. So it was surprising to see Calchas and Cassandra in the second half. And it's explained beautifully, like they were both priests of the same area. They knew each other from before the fall of Troy, but maybe foreshadow that in the beginning of the book, so it's not a total left field when suddenly they're reminiscing about their time spent together at the temple. That would have been super duper helpful. Maybe take out some of the backstory about Calchas. Like, I don't need to know that he once had a threesome with 2 dudes. I mean, good for him. Fantastic. Have fun. Didn't add a whole lot to the story. Maybe have a little bit about his memory with Cassandra in there instead, so that you know that there's a pre-existing relationship and you're not kind of smacked in the face when it comes up in the present day narration. But I did enjoy that. It was surprising. And yeah, interested to see what Cassandra does, how she works in the third book. Was there anything that you were surprised by, or maybe something you were disappointed that was left out?
I mean, I feel like I've talked at length today about all the things that I was disappointed in. So yeah, I'll go with um things that I was sad were left out. I wanted more with Helen, definitely. I
Same.
mean, I knew we probably weren't going to get a lot more just because, well, it wasn't really set up. There was no foreshadowing that we'd get more, so it was just kind of like, nah. So I was like, okay, but yeah, I would have liked more with her because we don't get to hear from her a lot. She's one of these voices we just kind of like, meh.
I
So
would like, sorry, I'm going to cut in here. And if someone listening has a recommendation, please let us know. I want a book of the Trojan War from Helen's point of view. I want to know what
yeah,
the hell she's doing. And
yes,
women and Fall of a City gets into that beautifully. I enjoyed how much Helen we saw in that, but I want a book narrated by Helen with Helen's thoughts and feelings and what the hell is going on, because I think that would be really, really interesting. And there are so many
yes,
different directions you can take it. That would be fascinating.
yes. I mean, because we don't really have anything that even comes close to it. I mean, I guess we sort of have bits and pieces of narration or things from her point of view, but not really. No, I do. I also I want something that is completely hers. Um because when I think of her and when I wanna be more charitable, I don't think of the Troy 2004 version of her because that was just sad and disappointing, and it makes me angry, makes my blood boil. But I sort of think of, like, the Helen from Fall of a City, because then she was at least a bit more well-rounded, more conflicted. Because at least with that version, it would always cut to the when Alexander's missing, she feels bad. She feels really bad, like real, real bad. Or, and then she'll have this moment of, I left my daughter in Sparta. And you're like, oh, okay, she's feeling bad about leaving her child behind, even though she was like, yeah, well, she doesn't need me. I'm still like, okay, well,
Ciao, baby.
whatever. But, and then maybe was it Helena Troy? I don't remember which one we did. We sort of got her, but no, like none of it is a complete and full picture. It's just snippets. And I'm tired of snippets. Now we have all these freaking revivals and retellings of modern myth, especially this one. So, yes, if someone is out there, please make me a thing where I can hear from Helen and only Helen. Oh, it's like the only Helen fans. No, not fans. Only Helen space. I don't know. No, this is sounding really weird because now I sound like a Helen fan and I'm not a Helen fan.
It's weird because thinking back to the predictions episode we did, like neither of us liked Helen. We were not expecting to like Helen. I still don't really like her, but I feel like she's kind of given the short end of the stick here, right? Everyone blames her for this, and there's very little of Helen speaking for herself to kind of exonerate her reputation.
Yeah, well, the closest we got is the one from Fall of a City. I feel that's the closest one we got to even sort of looking like uh although I'm like, so is she adult or is she a child? Because Helen of Troy says she's a child. And then others are like, she's a grown-ass adult who's making these decisions. I think what was it? Was it during the predictions episode? Something when we were talking about how old are they? Aren't they as old as like Romeo and Juliet? So technically, if she's not actually an adult, then these would be like childish decisions where eh, it's hard for her to account for herself. But I I don't.
And especially because of how long the war is, I suspect that feelings, thoughts, and motivations would obviously change. So if you get her running away on like a childish whim and then getting to Troy and 2 years in thinking, what did I do? Why did like 15-year-old me think this was a good idea? That would be very interesting to me.
I feel like she's like 13 though.
Yeah.
But isn't it sad that even if she ran away or was stolen or however you want to interpret that, at 13 on a childish thing, by the end of the war she'd still only be 23, and as a 23-year-old, your brain is still not fully formed as an adult because that shit doesn't set until you're like 25. So I'm like, oh my god, so she could have started at 13, legitimately a child. But she would still be 23, and 23-year-olds, as we know, make stupid decisions all the time. Like I know that's when you're ideally graduated from college, but come on, let's be real. What 23-year-old actually makes like good decisions? Especially with romantic stuff. I mean, okay, I know a lot of responsible 23-year-olds who could manage their finances and who worked through college or, got a job or did something responsible financially. That's all well and good. At 23, I'm sorry, you're really not that mature for love and romance. So, nah, I don't. No, 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 no. Helen is like, yes, Helen does get shortchanged a lot because we never hear from her ever. But I don't really know if there's much she could do even if she gets her own narrative, because if she's, like, 13, well, that's all you need to know, she's 13.
Yeah.
Um,
It'd be nice
I
to
think we
see where it
tried
goes, though.
I think we did try to determine her age because we were like, "Well, she has a child, so how old do you have to be?" I mean, well, she could have a child from, like, 9 years old or 10 years old, but we're kind of just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm kinda just like, I don't know, but I think she's at least 13, 14, or 15, which would still make her 23, 24, 25 at the end of the war, so still
For
not
us
like
on the young end of things.
Yeah, still not like sage adult, because I mean, I'm a little closer to it. I only just turned 27 in September. So I'm kind of like, okay, so that would be like being in Troy until 2 years ago. Um, yeah. When I think of shit I did 5 years ago, I'm like, ha 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 ha, I was such a child. Why did I say or do that? And I'm like, it would be like that times 10 for Helen. So I will just say, yes, I was disappointed we didn't get more from her because she does qualify as a woman of Troy, definitely. So she would have been a perspective I like to hear. And I really felt that this would have been the natural other narrative that she would show up in, because Natalie Haynes didn't cover her in her novel. So if she, because the natural fit would have been to be in something like that. So since she wasn't, I would have expected her in something like this, because I don't think any of the other adaptations we've seen really would cover the women's issues or the women's problems or whatever the way they do here. So yeah, I'm just like, okay, great.
So if anyone listening is either planning on writing one or knows of one that we haven't found, please tell us, because that would be wonderful. And we should probably wrap up for today's episode. But everyone, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so that's what we think about the end of Women of Troy. Let us know what you think, if you agree with us, if you disagree with us. And if you're Pat Barker and you happen to listen to this one day, we would like to talk to you because we have so many questions. I don't really think she's going to listen to this, but just in case, might as well say that now. But yeah, so join us next week for Song of Achilles, yet another Iliad adaptation. But this time we will be departing from the mostly female perspective, and we will be diving into the head and consciousness of Patroclus.
Beautiful.
Great. Well, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.